Yeah, so politically, I stay away from making any comments about South Africa's election. I've been here 2 years. Who am I to make a comment on South Africa's election? There are people who've been here their entire lives, and their grandparents were here their entire lives, and they understand the complexities of South African politics. So I simply say I'm on the side of whoever's going to make life as good for the children in Soweto as it is for the children in Sandton.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum, and welcome to another edition of Debunked here on INX Prime. For today's program, we have a guest in studio, and the focus is going to be multifaceted. Personal life story, a book, and also a bit about the US and our own country, South Africa. Our guest in studio today for the program is Asad al-Malik. He is a postdoctoral fellow at the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Wits. He's written a book. It's called Find Home Again, My Journey from the United States to South Africa. We'll talk to him about his life, we'll talk to him about the book, and we'll talk to him about the US and especially the recent elections and what does that mean for the world, for Africa, and for South Africa. Asad, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum assalam, Maki. Thank you so much for having me here, brother.
Let me start on a general note. Tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself.
So I was born and raised in New Orleans many years ago, and lived there most of my life up until I was 43 years old. Went to school there. My parents can trace their history back to that area for about 250 years. So we've been there for a while. Met my wife in undergrad in college, and we've been together, married about 15 years, but we've known each other since we were like 19 or 20. And if I told you my age, you can do the math, right? And then I guess we'll get into a little how I got here, but we started coming to South Africa in 2019, and that's when a lot of major changes took place.
So let's go to that. I mean, how did you come to South Africa? What brought you here, and how does that tie up with the book?
Okay, so my first visit to South Africa was in 2019 with my family. And just to kind of put it into perspective, it was the year that Ghana announced a certain campaign called the Year of Return. And it was for all those in the African diaspora to return to Ghana, right? And we wanted to return, to go to Ghana. Plane tickets were just too high. So there are a lot more flights between the U.S. and South Africa. And 10 years prior to 2019, in 2009, we were in Tanzania for a while, and we met a young lady who was born in Cape Town, and she became a very close family friend. And she always told us to visit South Africa, visit South Africa. And I had my hesitancies. But in 2019, we decided to come, and I mean, almost instantly, I fell in love with the country.
What were the hesitancies?
So I can remember one time in particular, I was sitting in Rosebank at News Cafe, and I just looked around, and it was one of the few times in my life that I didn't feel like a minority. Everyone that I saw looked like me. They reflected that no one knew that I was not from South Africa. I was just another person. And this is this is an experience that most African Americans have never felt, because we're only 14% of the U.S. population. We live in certain areas, and when outside of those areas, you really know what it's like to be othered. So having that experience was very similar to what Richard Pryor discussed when he looked around, when he first visited Africa, and he looked around and he saw that everyone was brothers, and for lack of a better term. So yeah, it was that experience that really shook me in a way. Even when I returned to New Orleans, I just couldn't shake that feeling.
Did you not have any hesitations around crime or any such stories that unfortunately have become infamous when it comes to South Africa?
So New Orleans is probably the reigning murder capital of the United States for 8 out of the last 10 years. It has always been a violent place. So so as a researcher, this question comes up often about the violence in South Africa. Well, I live in Johannesburg, so I wanted to know how many cities in the U.S. had a higher murder rate, right, than Johannesburg, and it was 50, easily 50 cities. And all of the major ones, Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore, New Orleans, Philadelphia. So I think for me, unfortunately, the idea that there's crime and violence is just as American as apple pie.
So what brought you then to South Africa after that visit in 2019?
I couldn't shake the feeling that I had in 2019. A friend of mine, Dr. James Bennett, who was a dentist in Mississippi, he said he now lives in Centurion. He described it, the feeling of going back to the U.S. after experiencing South Africa was like putting on a weight vest. And we're speaking specifically about African American men. The way you have to navigate the caprices of whiteness in America is very heavy. The way you have to sometimes, or there's an expectation that you reduce yourself to try to fit into these narrow expectations of what blackness should be, what black maleness should be. And here we didn't have those feelings. So it became very heavy living in the United States. And in 2020, obviously there was COVID, and my wife and I were at home, and we were just having a very serious heart-to-heart. Like, what do we want our future to look like? Do we want our children to have to exist in a world where their existence is based on the moods of whiteness? And the answer to that question was no.
How long did it take to make that decision final?
Well, 2020, we made the decision. But, obviously it was COVID. No one could travel. More importantly, there were visa process because we want to make sure that we are here in South Africa legally, right? So we were trying to figure out the visa process. And a Muslim sister who watched my YouTube channel, Dr. Hasina Ibrahim, reached out to me and she said, hey, there's a center called the African Center for the Study of the United States, and they're looking for postdocs. You should reach out to them. And alhamdulillah, I reached out. And 2 weeks later, I had an invitation, and that was what allowed us to get the visa to be here.
How different and how similar is life in South Africa to the United States? You've spoken about the aspect of being an African American in the US and being a minority. Here, you don't feel like a minority. But it is, after all, a so-called first world country, the United States, and this is a so-called third world country. There are some significant differences.
No. Not in terms of infrastructure. So, South Africa is also called the U.S. of the continent, right? So, oftentimes students at WITS will ask me, what is it like in, New York, or what is it like in the U.S.? I say, well, ride around Joburg if you want to see what a typical major American city looks like. And Joburg has all of the infrastructure as well as all of the problems that major American cities have. So, there's a lot of similarities there. But once you begin to get under the surface, you can see that there are differences in the ways and some of the perceptions of the world, the ideas of politics. There are a lot of similarities, particularly between Black South Africans and African Americans, both who have faced these histories of apartheid and Jim Crow. So there's kind of these easy conversations that we can have where there's this prior knowledge that we don't have to explain. But there are also many differences. And as I navigate South Africa, I learn about the differences and begin to appreciate this country for the unique nation it is.
Just looking at the timeline, I mean, when you settled in South Africa, you kind of got hit by the peak of the load shedding challenge. Did you start to have some doubts at that time?
No, not at all. So we came in 2019. 2020 we couldn't travel. 2021 we came 3 times. So we had experienced load shedding often. And I knew that any place that I lived here, I needed to have an inverter. So we kind of got that. That was a priority.
So the book then, what that led to the decision to talk about, to write a book?
So one of the questions that I often get is, why would someone move to South Africa from the U.S.? And from that question, the book grew to cover the 20 years of my life from 2005 until present, right? Next year will be 20 years since Hurricane Katrina came through New Orleans and decimated my city, and everyone lost their houses, but many of us lost a sense of home. And I describe home in the book as a dancer, a body forever in motion. And it was in 2005 that body started to be in motion for me, meaning that my idea of home began to fluctuate and began to change because we had been stripped of home. So I began to tell the story of my experiences during Hurricane Katrina and that sense of loss. And then it leads up to South Africa and how I found a sense of home again.
What were you hoping to achieve via the book? I mean, what kind of message are you aiming to convey to the reader?
Besides my personal narrative and my story, I also want them to see a different perception of the experiences in the United States. I think Hollywood has done a fantastic job of shaping the narrative of the U.S., but there's different experiences. I tell my South African friends often, the U.S. is not New York. It's not L.A. It's Indiana. It's Ohio. It's Alabama. It's Mississippi. And those experiences are never broadcast to the world.
Racial tensions in America, right? We know some years ago we had the killing of George Floyd at the hands of police. It was the first Trump administration, and now there's a second Trump administration, and we'll talk about that. Race in South Africa, not only in terms of apartheid in our history, but even today, racism is still a significant challenge in South Africa. What's your view, again, on the similarities and the differences on the race issue between South Africa and the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. I think, again, so in the book I call Black South Africans distant cousins. And again, it creates that familiar relationship that we have. I think that the unique difference between the South African history of racial apartheid and the United States' history of Jim Crow is that it's the minority versus the majority, right? So we are living in a hostile environment in the United States where we are the minority, right? Here, the racial system of apartheid was against the majority population. And the presentation of that kind of mirror effect is vastly different. And here's what I mean. Sure, there's issues around land. It's about the issues around wealth. However, when I walk into Woolworths or when I walk into a restaurant here in Santon or in Waterfall, I do not feel the pressures of being the only one of my kind in that room. And that day-to-day living, the relief of that day-to-day pressure is just something that you cannot describe. It is, again, taking that weight vest off.
Let's talk about the elections, right? But from a racial lens. When you look at African Americans in general, minorities in general, and then specifically African American Muslims, what's your analysis of who they voted for?
Whew. That's a heavy one. So African Americans in general obviously supported Vice President Harris. 78% of black men, 90 maybe so percent of black women. I do think African American Muslims were conflicted, not on whether Donald Trump was a better choice, but because of our brothers and sisters in Gaza, because of the genocide that has taken place, there was an internal conflict that had to be addressed. And I'm sure many African American Muslims went to the voting booth and held their nose and cast their vote for Vice President Harris, even though the Biden administration has a horrible history as it has handled the war in Gaza.
Those African Americans or minorities, Latinos and others who voted for Trump, but who don't really feel strongly about the Palestinian issue, what do you think would have been the factor in terms of why they would vote for Donald Trump, considering his views on minorities?
Well, there's always been a small contingency within the African American community that has leaned very right, very conservative, and who are willing to placate to whiteness in order to achieve a certain place or position, in order to achieve favor from the system. So those people have always existed. When we were enslaved on the plantation, there were individuals who would, work on behalf of the enslaver instead of their people trying to get free. So that's that is just the narrative of African Americans. So I'm not sure all of their motivations. Some people were just disgusted with the Democratic Party, and it was a vote of protest. Some people may have actually bought into the stories that Donald Trump was telling. But Allah knows best, and in time, I think those decisions will be made bare and very obvious to them, the repercussions of those decisions.
What do you anticipate in terms of a second Trump administration? We know what it was like 2016 through to 2019. Is there any reason to be somewhat more optimistic?
No.
Would the Republican Party try and keep a leash on him?
Absolutely not. There's no reason to be optimistic at all. You have a White House that is controlled by Donald Trump, a Supreme Court that is controlled by Donald Trump, and possibly both houses of Congress controlled by MAGA Republicans. What you have is now unchecked power. And much of what we relied on as African Americans was the federal government, right? It was the federal government that signed the Civil Rights Act, the federal government that signed the Voting Rights Act, when the states were being oppressive to our people. Now, in those same states, we have no recourse. There's no federal government to turn to. They will simply kick it back to the states. So we will be again we will be at the mercy of the caprices of whiteness. And this is not just a black problem. This is going to be a brown problem. This is going to be a problem for women. This is going to be a problem for other racial and minority groups. So I don't think there is anything to be optimistic about currently right now. It is my estimation that we are looking at a good decade or maybe 2 decades of just a very hostile environment for minorities and other marginalized groups.
Help us non-Americans, watching from a distance, understand the psyche of more than half of the American voters who put Donald Trump back in the White House. Mm-hmm. This is a man who's convicted. This is a man who's been indicted. This is a man who's got charges hanging over his head. This is a man who's shown you what kind of president he can be. This is a man who took the country to the brink of, call it an insurrection or a civil war, or whatever you want to call it, when he didn't want to accept the election results. Mm-hmm. Why would that percentage of American voters, unlike the last time when Hillary Clinton won the popular vote but lost the electoral college, this time he's even won the popular vote. Why would Americans put that man back in the White House?
I think this is the America we've always known. This is the America that African Americans have definitely known. So we're not surprised by it. I think the world is just waking up to, oh, okay, this is what America really stands for. This so often after the election, people were saying this is not who we are as Americans. This is not who we are. I'm like, when have we not been this? When we were enslaving African Americans, when we were genociding Native Americans, right? When women couldn't vote, when LGBTQ members of our society were being killed. When has America not been this way, right? So I think it's just going. This election just shows the world who America truly is and what they really value.
The U.S. Africa and U.S. South Africa relations, right? Donald Trump made it quite clear, not only during his recent campaign, but more so when he actually was in office for an entire term, that he doesn't think much of Africa. Use very pejorative terms and language to refer to Africa and certain countries in Africa. That said, in the last year, the South African relationship with the U.S. has taken strain over the Russia-Ukraine issue and the whole ship and the U.S. ambassador and the comments he made in South Africa. Mm-hmm. Then also South Africa's very strong, morally courageous stance by taking Israel to the ICJ. Mm-hmm. There are concerns now, as Ibrahim Rasool is going to go back for a second stint as ambassador to the U.S. The last time around, it was during an Obama administration. Now it's a Trump administration. AGOA is critical for Africa, for South Africa. How do you foresee the Trump administration dealing with Africa in general and specifically South Africa going forward from here?
So I think whatever party is in the White House will always operate based on the interest of empire, the United States empire. whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. I do think for the African continent, a Democrat in the White House is always a more listening and willing ear, even if they don't necessarily operate on reciprocity and equality. I think now with a Donald Trump administration in the White House, the continent will not have that same willing ear. However, there is a competition for the continent, right? Between China, between the U.S., between Russian influence. So I do believe that there is an opportunity for the continent to leverage its position as something that's desired by these three major world powers, and not lean into any side too strongly, but do its best and operate in its own interest. Each nation operating in its own best interest. But it will be a difficult time for the continent in terms of aid coming from the U.S. I think Donald Trump's isolationist and make America great again and America first kind of idea will turn a lot of that foreign assistance back into the U.S.
Coming to South Africa now, what's your assessment of the country, having lived here for a period now? We've had our own elections. For the first time, we've got a coalition politics at national level. There are socioeconomic issues. How do you assess, both positively and negatively, the dynamics in South Africa?
Yeah, so politically, I stay away from making any comments about South Africa's election. I've been here 2 years. Who am I to make a comment on South Africa's election? There are people who've been here their entire lives, and their grandparents were here their entire lives, and they understand the complexities of South African politics. So I simply say I'm on the side of whoever's going to make life as good for the children in Soweto as it is for the children in Sandton. So I see the problems, but I've also seen the same problems in the United States. I see the poverty. We see the same poverty in the U.S. So I believe that the South African people have the will, the intelligence, and the ability to rectify whatever problem they may be facing in this nation.
What's your impressions of the Muslim community in South Africa?
Warm and welcoming, just like the South African people. So I think one of the things that I was kind of surprised about was that there were not a lot of African, like black Muslims in South Africa. And talking to my South African family, the relationship to Islam is seen as like a Indian religion or an Arab religion. In the U.S., that the first major Muslim was like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. So it has always been associated with the black community. A few things changed post 9/11, but prior to that, so Islam was always accepted as a religious alternative to Christianity in the black community. And to come here and to see like maybe black South Africans who were not, who were kind of weirded out that I was a Muslim, I was like, oh, I thought, So I learned a little bit there. But the community has been welcoming. We've celebrated Ramadan and had iftars with so many Muslim families around here. It's been a great experience.
Tell us more about your work at WITS.
So I oversee the diaspora project at the African Center for the Study of the United States, and the goal of the project is to connect African American institutions, organizations, and individuals with the continent. So the center started in 2018. It's the first of its kind center, an African center studying the United States. And so that's not just black Americans, it's studying all of the United States, our politics, our culture, our economics, but African Americans are a natural constituency for the continent. So it only made sense to have a specific focus on them, or a project that was focused on them, on us. So recently we have, the way we connect African Americans to the continent is either between cultural exchange and research and publication. So earlier this year, we brought 20 HBCU students, African American students, to WITS for a 2-week-long program. And now we're working with WITS Business School, Howard's Business School, Howard University in the States, as well as others, to create another program next year focused on business.
The book, I mean, how's it going? How long has it been out? Where can people get copies?
Thank you so much. The book is it's going pretty well. I have some great reviews on Amazon, so thanks to everyone that actually took time to write a review. It released on November 1st. You can find it on Amazon, Kindle, as well as Take a Lot.
All right. And when are you planning to go back to the US for a visit?
So I leave Saturday, this Saturday, to go back to my hometown. I have a conference there, but I'm only there a week, and then we'll see. I'll definitely be this side before inauguration, right? So yeah,
What do you miss the most about the US?
food in my hometown. So New Orleans is a seafood city. It's a city with heavy West African influence, and so there's certain dishes that I just can't get here. But fortunately, I go home and bring back seasonings and certain things that I can't find in Checkers, and make some good dishes at home.
What kind of dishes?
Jambalaya, gumbo. So I don't know if you've ever heard of jambalaya,
No.
but if you've heard of jollof from West Africa. So jambalaya is jollof of New Orleans. It traces its lineage to West Africa. Gumbo,
What's it made of? Can you give us some sort of
it's rice with a tomato, red pepper base, much like West African jollof. The only difference is that they use like chicken as the protein. We use seafood because we're by the water. Like we're literally surrounded by water. So yeah, so it's very similar. In fact, there's a Ghanaian family that we met that lives here. They live in Polo Fields out in Midrand. We've become close, and they invited us to their house and for jollof. And I said, you know what? I'm going to invite you to my house for some jambalaya. And when they came over, they were like, wait a minute, this is jollof. I was like, nah, it's jambalaya, but it's the same thing. So I miss that. Miss mom's cooking. I already talked to my mom. She's going to make, inshallah, some oxtails for me, and all that good stuff. So it's the food that I miss the most.
And finally, I mean, how much of South Africa have you been able to see since you've been here?
Oh, in 2019, I drove from Joburg to Kruger. So I've seen Mpumalanga. I've been to Durban twice, been to Cape Town, been to Pretoria. So I've seen a few areas.
Have you done the garden route?
No, I haven't done the garden route. Maybe one day. I think it's, 12 or 14 hours of a drive?
Well, it depends from where you go. Yeah.
Well, from Joburg to Cape Town.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bit far. The plane ride is only an hour.
But shukran so much, Brother Asad, for joining us and for the chat. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, my brother.
Assalamu alaikum wa
Wa
rahmatullahi
alaikum
wa
assalam.
barakatuh. To the viewers, until next week, fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.